Well, welcome everyone. It is so nice to be here with everyone to share the Dharma and enjoy the present moment. So what I'd like to do is to begin with the Liturgy Invocation for speaking about the Dharma. So the unsurpassed, profound, and sublime Dharma is difficult to encounter, even in a billion years. Today we see, hear, receive, and uphold it, vowing to fathom the true meaning of the Tathagata. So today I'm going to be speaking about chapter 13 in the Lotus Sutra. It's interesting after having spoken that invocation, because it's very pertinent to the chapter that I'm dealing with, because the 13th chapter is entitled in Chinese Trancher, and it's variously translated as fortitude, urging devotion, exhortation to uphold the sutra, or encouraging devotion. And that chur, the second character, which the base meaning is to hold, but I think it really suggests all of what are called the 5 practices, which are accept, read, recite, teach, and copy the sutra. So that's kind of the underlying message of the chapter. And of course, there's a lot more in the chapter that we'll get to. So what I'm first going to do is just give a very brief description of what happens in the chapter, and then some general remarks about the Lotus itself, so that people who are coming here perhaps for the first time will have some idea of the contextualization, understand where we're coming from and how this fits in. So this sutra begins with the medicine king Bodhisattva and joy in preaching Bodhisattva discussing vows, and they are vowing to uphold the sutra, to spread it. And this chapter gives the last 2 prophecies in the entire Lotus Sutra. There have been prophecies right from the beginning with actually there was the prophecy of the pure body a Buddha that's told in the past by Manjushri in chapter 1. But the thing that everyone knows is the proclamation and the prophecy of Maitreya, who is a Buddha, the Buddha to come, and that's recognized in all Buddhist traditions. So a lot of different prophecies have occurred, but here we have the last 2, which are of the Buddha's aunt, and actually his effective mother, Mahaprajapati, and his wife when he was Siddhartha Gautama, right? As a Buddha, he no longer has a wife. But both of these very close relations to him have become part of the Sangha, very important. And now he's giving them a prophecy of Buddhahood. And then there are a number of groups of Arhats and Bodhisattvas who are vowing once again to uphold the sutra. So I wanted to talk about one of the main topics in this particular chapter, which is prophecy. And I have to remark about the way this can be portrayed. So there's a great translation in English of the Heart Sutra. I'm sorry, of the Lotus Sutra, done in 1974 by Leon Hurwitz. And in his introduction, he gives a summary of all 28 chapters. Now, this probably isn't fair to him, because he's really trying to condense a massive work into just a few short pages. But when he gets to the chapters where there are prophecies, and some of the chapters like chapters 6, 8, and 9, and this chapter 13 in some ways are devoted to prophecies. He simply puts the rubric more prophecies. And, sort of his, prophecy of Buddhahood is kind of a ho-hum thing. So I imagined two guys that are speaking about what they'd like to do one evening. And one says to his friend, Jack, I don't know, Jack, what would you like to do? Would you like to get pizza? Would you like to go to a movie? Or how about a prophecy of Buddhahood? And of course, Jack would say, is that a medium or a large pizza, right? He had his proclivities well in hand. So the thing is, for a practitioner, the prophecy of Buddhahood is a pretty astounding event. It's something that really affirms our understanding. It shows us some direction, and of course, as we'll see in the Buddhahood, in this chapter, it's actually showing our innate Buddha nature. It's something about the future, and it's something also about the present, and that's something very important to keep in hand and in mind. And just to give a range of what prophecy means in the Lotus Sutra, we've seen a variety of types of prophecy and intensity. And as I mentioned in some of my earlier lectures, there's a expedient mean called Vayakana, which is assurances. And this has been part of the Buddhist canon from the beginning. These are given in the Pali canon as well as in Mahayana. It's one of the many expedient means, the way that the Buddha gets his message to us. So there are prophecies that are given to a particular group, like 500 or 8,000 arhats, that they will attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, the highest type of, the highest possible attainment, which is tantamount to Buddhahood. Then there are prophecies which are given to specific arhats and bodhisattvas, who at the time would, of course, been part of the Sangha, and to people who've studied Buddhism and practiced, they would be names that we would know quite well, like Sariputra, Mahakashapa, and Mahamauddalana. All of these things are quite well known. Then there are the prophecies which occur in this chapter, which are not specifically spiritual connections, because these two figures, the Buddha's ass and his former wife, were really familial connections. So there's a very interesting dynamic that goes on in this chapter. And also in terms of prophecy, there is actualization, right? In the terms of the last chapter we did, chapter 12, which showed the dragon princess, the daughter of Sagara, instantly turning into a Buddha. And so that happens, once again, right in the moment of the chapter. It's rather remarkable. And there's also a Buddha in chapter 8, who is called the victorious through great penetration of knowledge. And he had to practice for 540 million of nayutas of kalpas, or trillions of myriads of eons. And then once he had actually subdued all the forces of Mara and got rid of all of his defilements, he still had to wait another 11 kalpas. And these numbers that we see in the Lotus Sutra are just astounding, and they're beyond comprehension, and I believe they're supposed to be beyond any kind of cognitive comprehension. And I thought that if Professor Edward Kasner, who was the professor at Columbia, professor of mathematics, who came up with the term Google, which originally was spelled Googol, which was the highest number that his nephew could imagine, although the nephew didn't give a figure to it, but Professor Kasner did of one with 100 zeros after it. And then later there was a Googolplex, which was a Google to the Google power. The Buddha might have used those. I don't know that there would be any mathematical discrepancy between terms like that and the terms that are used in the Lotus Sutra. So these prophecies are something that we can contemplate and look at the nature of them, the depth, what they are actually trying to show us, trying to tell us. Now, what I'd like to do is to give some general remarks on the sutra so that people will have some idea where we are and how this all fits in. So, as many of you know, the sutra begins with the Buddha sitting in samadhi in a great assembly of every possible type of being that exists in the universe. And the samadhi that he's in is called the samadhi of innumerable meanings. And that is really an idea that there is nothing that the mind is bound by. Their meanings are absolutely innumerable. Every kind of thing that the mind can open to is possible with the Buddha mind. So the Buddha is in this deep samadhi, and he emits this bright light from his urna, the tuft between his eyebrows, and he illuminates 18,000 realms and shows the not only what people are doing, but how people are practicing throughout the universe, it seems. Even though the number 18,000 is used, it seems to be kind of a record or presentation of what's happening everywhere. And this is of great puzzlement to all of the assembly. And Maitreya asked Manjushri, what's going on? And Manjushri said, well, I've seen this before. And when this happens, when the Buddha emits light like this, it means that he is going to preach the Dharma of the Lotus Sutra, the Sadharma Pundarika Sutra in Sanskrit. Often in Chinese, often referred to as just the Fa Hua Jing, the flower sutra, and what this means, according to Gene Reeves, is that we are the flowers. We are the ones who are flowering within the sutra. So it's a very deep, strong message. But the thing is, so in one sense, the whole sutra is given, is proclaimed, is displayed in the first chapter. But then there's a second chapter, which is of expedient means. The Buddha realizes that no one can understand the mind of a Buddha, but it can be approached, it can be studied, and it is our birthright, this kind of realization when we are free of all of our delusions. So the Buddha explains how, in order to actually transmit this great teaching, he has to do it little by little. And I think every time I give a talk on this sutra, I really have to quote this poem from Emily Dickinson. Say all the truth, but say it's slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's dazzling surprise. As lightning to the children eased, with explanation kind. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man go blind. So the Buddha doesn't want us to go blind, doesn't want us to be overwhelmed. There's an understanding that everyone has a different capacity. And this is very much highlighted in chapter 5, the chapter on the plants, how the Buddha Dharma rains down on everyone, but everyone receives it and understands it in a different way. And as the sutra has been unfolding, it's showing this in many different phases, going through parables. People know of the parable of the burning house and of the prodigal son. All of these things are showing how we have a deep understanding that we don't quite understand yet. And what the Buddha is proclaiming is the one vehicle, the one great vehicle. And as Norman Fisher says, a great Zen master, that the Lotus Sutra is a teaching without a teaching, because Manjushri says that the Buddha is going to speak the great Lotus Sutra, but he really never does it, on one sense. In the other sense, he's doing it all of the time. And that's what's really quite so interesting. The teaching is kind of seeping into our pores, if you will. And by what this particular chapter is advocating, which is accepting, reading, writing, teaching, copying the sutra, so that the whole process becomes, in the words of Uno Teititsu, a somatic kind of experience. So we are encountering the sutra with body, speech, and mind. And that's the kind of thing, it's very hard to express that. So, and the one vehicle can't be defined. And I've come to the conclusion, now I may change my mind, but now it seems that the one vehicle is mind itself, nothing other than that. And mind can't be defined. It can't be gotten inside of, and you can't be outside of it. It's beyond our normal cognitive powers. It's beyond any kind of cognitive powers. It's beyond the realm of our senses, but it's inclusive of that. It's a seeming riddle whenever you get into these kind of things. Now, a very interesting thing in looking at the sutra is the commentary of Dao Zhang, who was a great Buddhist scholar, lived from 340 to 434 CE in the Common Era. He's the first Chinese Buddhist to write a commentary on the sutra. And throughout his commentary, and actually 139 times in his commentary, according to the scholar Young-Hoo Kim, who wrote a book about Dao Zhang, he keeps talking about Li. This is a character in Chinese, which means principle, essence. Actually, Li in itself is almost undefinable, but it is the thing that is underlying the sutra. It's the message, the meaning, the actual experience of the sutra that is beyond the words, beneath the words. So Dao Zhang keeps exhorting us to look for Li, see the inner meaning in it. And this to me makes quite a bit of sense, because in reading the sutra, many times the Buddha will talk about upholding the sutra and how important it is to spread the word of the sutra, and how dire it is if you don't. And in my first readings of the sutra, I'm a pretty literal-minded guy. I sort of wondered, well, if I was in the audience, I would say to the Buddha, world-honored one, you've just begun your discourse. How can I proclaim something which I don't even understand? I haven't heard the whole thing. And so that to me is that's my ordinary sentient being mind talking. What the Buddha is talking about is the Lotus Sutra, which is beyond words. And to me, it's very much in accord with Bodhidharma's teaching of, what is beyond the sutras, beyond words, that points to mind and shows the nature of mind. That is what the Lotus Sutra does, and it does it not by telling us the way that other sutras do, other sutras go deeply into the architecture of the mind and go deeply into specific kinds of practices that will help us get rid of our vexations and understand nature of the mind and ultimately help all sentient beings, which is the great message of the Lotus Sutra. So this is where the sutra is really living, and to me, the sutra, it seems like it happened 2,500 years ago. That is, of course, the conceit, even though the scholars say that the sutra was finally compiled by the 2nd century of the Common Era. So when you look at Li, and you're looking at the depth of this of what the sutra is saying, you can see that the sutra is transpiring right now at this moment, and what upholding it really means is to practice well, and that's actually what the sutra says, because if you look at the 2nd chapter, when it talks about following the Buddha way, there are just so many ways, from building stupas to making paintings to even a child drawing pictures in the sand, or even nodding your head. I think this is a clue to what the approach can be to the Lotus Sutra, so that we don't get lost in all of these phantasmagoric kind of images and things way beyond our understanding. And one interesting thing about the prophecy that we have, and what I said about where are we in the sutra. Now, when Dao Zhang wrote his commentary, the 4th and early 5th century, he was using the translation of Kumarajiva. And this chapter, which I'm calling chapter 13, did not exist as chapter 13. It was chapter 12. The chapter that I spoke about last time, the Devadatta chapter, which has the story about Devadatta, who seemed to be the Buddha's great enemy, but turned out to be his savior, and the Buddhahood of the dragon princess. That seems to be an interpolation that was maybe put in by Kumarajiva. And one way you can actually see this is in the chapter, what is now chapter 12, the Buddha actually talks about upholding this chapter on Devadatta. He actually describes a chapter per se. That doesn't generally happen in sutras, so it's quite interesting. And for me, as a practitioner, I find that's fine. The message comes to us in many different ways, and everything that we're encountering for us until we reach Buddhahood is going to be expedient means, and we have to understand it in that sense, with that frame of in that frame of mind. So another thing to look at that comes up often in the sutra, which was puzzling to me at first. Throughout the sutra, as the Buddha is giving prophecies to various individuals and various groups, the people, understandably, who got this prophecy are jumping for joy. And they say, we got what we never had before. And at first, that sounded a little bit materialistic to me. I mean, it's not like the Arhats, the Bodhisattvas got, toaster ovens or a timeshare in Florida, right? It's nothing nothing that they could grasp in their hands, let's say. And so what I've come to see or to believe is that what they got was the ability to help other sentient beings. And this really is something quite new. It's not so much that they were hurting, having achieved arhatship and divested themselves of greed, hatred, and ignorance. But according to the Lotus Sutra and many Mahayana teachings, they were actually cut off in many ways. And now the sutra is allowing them to connect to everyone. And that is the great news. That is what they had that they didn't have before. And that's why Donald Lopez, a very famous Buddhist scholar, talks about the Lotus Sutra continually having self-promotion, talking about how important it is to uphold the sutra and bringing up the name of the sutra and the teaching time after time. And I disagree. I don't think that the sutra has a self, and I don't think it's self-promoting. I think the sutra is pointing to this deep meaning, the li, the nature of mind itself. Once again, it's doing it by showing us, not by telling us. And we have to read it quite deeply before we can approach that kind of understanding. So let me go now into the actual story, the actual events of the chapter that we're discussing today, chapter 13. So if I were to title it, I would say it's vows to uphold the sutra. There are 3 interpersonal exchanges, 2 of prophecy, 1 of non-attachment, and the description of the challenges. That's what's really contained in the sutra. And what I want to do is go to the first prophecy that's given to Mahaprajapati, the Buddha's aunt. Now, once again, in my modus operandus, my intention in this talk is to really broaden our understanding and our depth and see many different angles of the teaching that we might not have thought about before. At least I hadn't thought about before. So one really interesting thing is that there are people, I've mentioned this before, individuals that would be known to the assembly at the time of the Buddha and are well known to Buddhist practitioners. Now, in the Far East, in Asia, the names of Mahaprajapati and Yasidara are well known, certainly better known than would be here in America. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is to give more depth into who these people are or were. And because we approach the sutra kind of in an allegorical way. In one sense, I mentioned Leon Hurwitz, more prophecies, more this. In one sense, that's kind of how we're interested. We're very grateful to know that these kind of prophecies are given to all sentient beings. That's one of the important parts of the message of the Lotus Sutra. And we're happy for the individuals, but we're more self-involved, if you will. It's nice that there are these prophecies. And if we look closer to who the people are, it's also a way of relating our particular lives to what goes on in the sutra. These are not just, cut out characters that kind of take, are placeholders in the sutras. And they appear in many sutras. They were, and maybe they are now, real flesh and blood people with different kinds of relationships, with hopes and fears, loves and loss, a variety of things. And the prophecy comes at the tail end, right, of their lives, when they're ready to hear the message. They have practiced very hard. And the Buddha is acknowledging that. And some of these descriptions can be quite moving. And we can see that a sutra is a proclamation. It is something spoken to all. And the arhats and bodhisattvas vow to proclaim the sutra everywhere and even go into foreign lands, which could be interpreted in many different ways, into hostile territory. It doesn't necessarily have to be places far from where we live. We can encounter difficulties right where we live. We can encounter foreign territories right in our neighborhood in many ways. And one of the things that I think that I'm going to mention is how we look at the sutra and these stories that are about to come up. And you'll see, of course, that there are many versions of things that some of you will know and some of you may not have heard before. And, you know, there's always this question of the truth of the sutra. You know, are there facts in the sutra? And I think it's important to understand the difference between spiritual facts, which is what the sutra is a collection of spiritual facts, as opposed to you know, legal facts. And one thing that is rather amazing, rather sad, is if you think about it, in January 6th of this year, there was an insurrection in Washington. There's some 600 people stormed the Capitol. A number of people were killed. And this event was recorded thousands and thousands of times in video, written about, talked about, photographed, recorded. And these records were passed literally to millions and millions of people. Yet, some people in our country think that it was an ordinary day. There were just tourists there, nothing of note happened. And other people think that there was an attempted coup on the government. So if something so close in time to us right now can be a matter of dispute, a matter of factual dispute, when we're looking at things that transpired 2,500 years ago, and actually millennium and eons and eons and eons before that, because these kind of events are recounted in the Lotus Sutra, we can give our critical factual minds a rest and just see what comes up in the sutra. So first, I'm going to talk about Mahaprajapati. In assembling the information for this, I'm really indebted to a book by Wendy Garling, who's a Buddhist scholar who researched all of the Pali Canon, from sutras to the Vinaya to folk songs and folk poems and literary traditions throughout Asia, in order to assemble a story of Mahaprajapati. Her book is called The Woman Who Raised the Buddha. And one thing which I'd like to go into more depth than I think I will go into is how one of the intents of her book was to resurrect, if you will, the importance of Mahaprajapati that has been obscured by cultural appropriation, male supremacy, and social mores which were not necessarily favorable to women. And she brings out many, many stories of great female practitioners that really are part of the Sangha, part of everything that has come down to us today. And these are things that we really should recognize and pay homage to. So I just wanted to mention her book and how important it is to this talk. Now, one thing really interesting, we don't usually think in these terms, but imagine if you were living at the Buddha's time and you were in Siddhartha's household. Before the event of the Buddha's awakening, no one had ever seen a Buddha before in the world. No one really knew what a Buddha was, I think, because Buddhas had not appeared in the world. So it was very hard for people to get their ordinary sentient being minds around. One thing I always think of when I talk about things like this is right after the Buddha's awakening, when he was on his way to see the 5 ascetics, he met a man on the road who looked at him and said, "You look different." And the Buddha said, "I am different. I'm awake." And the man said, well, we don't know what he said, but he nodded his head and he walked on. And I always thought that that is probably one of the greatest missed opportunities in the universe. But still, Mahaprajapati was in the Kalyanas, a clan closely associated with the Sakyas. Maya, her sister, was the one who had actually given birth to the Buddha. And there's a very moving poem where Maya hands off the baby Buddha to her sister, knowing that she will die soon. So Mahaprajapati began with the loss of her sister, and she then becomes part of Suddhodana, the Buddha's father's household, and it becomes his wife. Her life is really turned upside down. And we don't always look at those kind of things. And so I'm just giving this as a preface for what actually happens in chapter 13 of the Lotus Sutra that we're discussing. So the Buddha is looking out at his assembly, and Mahaprajapati gazed with a respectful countenance, unblinking, at the Buddha. And the Buddha said, "You look at me visibly anxious, and your mind has no reason to think that I won't mention your name in terms of receiving a prophecy or an assurance of highest perfect enlightenment." And he says, "You should know that I've made a general proclamation that all Shravakas will receive an assurance." And in that little exchange, there's enough information that you could posit to write a novel. And you'll see that when we get to Yasidara, someone did very recently write a novel called Yasidara and the Buddha, based on many of these references that we're going to talk about. So in the chapter, we have the Buddha gazing at Mahaprajapati, the aunt who raised him, a woman very important in his life. And here there's actually a verbal exchange. Oftentimes the Buddha is reading people's thoughts. He knows what they're thinking and he addresses it. Here he's really seeing what is going on with her. And I don't know, Donald Lopez thinks perhaps that he's annoyed, which I don't think. I think that the lifetime of their relationship is kind of flashing before their eyes in a certain way. At least you can posit that. So the Buddha then goes ahead and gives a prophecy of Buddhahood to Mahaprajapati. Now, there are much more elaborate descriptions elsewhere in the sutra. He describes that Mahaprajapati will become a great teacher, which of course is central to the Lotus Sutra, and then will have a particular Buddha name and a Buddha land. He doesn't mention how long her kalpa will be, but she and her 6,000 bhikshunis are given this assurance of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. And that is a great moment because it shows the inclusivity of the Lotus Sutra. In many ways, there's a lot of nuance in the Lotus Sutra, but women are seen to be as simply as important, no different from men in terms of their spiritual capacity. And that's very important to understand. So there are many things I will cite about Mahaprajapati. So here's a poem from the Theragatha, which is the collection of poems by nuns, one of the earliest parts of the Pali Canon. Mahaprajapati says, I had already been a mother, a son, a father, a brother, and a grandmother, but not knowing things as they really are. I was reborn and reborn, never having enough. And elsewhere, we find that she had made a vow to be the mother of Buddha and other Buddhas eons and eons and eons ago. And when her son leaves in the Great Departure, now here is a difference in the story that you probably know. Most people know how the Buddha was a prince in the kingdom, in the Sakya kingdom, and for various reasons, he became aware of the suffering in the world, and he realized he had to leave his palace in order to practice, in order to attain Buddhahood. So the story that I think most of us know is that he tiptoed out and left his wife and child, and his charioteer Channa took him away into the forest. So in other versions, both Mahaprajapati and Yasidara were aware that he was about to leave. And so in this one story, Mahaprajapati assembled all the women of pleasure and upbraided them with their want of influence over the mind of the prince. And she said, let none of you fail to provide amusement for him night and day. Let there be no interval of darkness, and never be without wine and burning perfumes. Let there be guards at every door to prevent ingress or egress. For remember, if the prince escapes, there will be no other pleasure within the palace. She really didn't want him to go. And, when you think about it, she had no idea what was going to happen or the amazing things that would happen. She was losing her son. And actually, later in the Pali Canon, the Buddha addresses his monks and says, he acknowledged the pain of his departure from his parents. He said, while still young, a black-haired boy blessed with youth, in the first phase of my life, I shaved off my hair and my beard, and though my father and mother wished otherwise and grieved with tearful faces, I put on the yellow robe and went forth into the house life, from house life into homelessness. And then there are many passages about Mahaprajapati worrying about her son, about his soft feet treading through the forest. How will he deal with the heat and the rain? And his father, the great king Suddhana, is outraged that his son is begging when he comes back 12 years later. Also, Mahaprajapati was, according to one account, was so distraught by her son's departure that she wept until she lost her eyesight, and she didn't regain it until he returned 12 years later. And Suddhana is outraged that his son is is begging, and in modern terms, did he think his son was a loser? I mean, he's left all of this wealth and power. What was he thinking? And then Mahaprajapati goes on to empower the Sakya women. The men, 500 at one time, all leave home, and the women are left alone, and they're angry that they can't hear the Dharma. And Mahaprajapati approaches Sudana, and he says, "Let it be so." And so she's always advocating for the other women, and she is the one, with Ananda's help, who appealed to the Buddha to allow women into the Sangha. Another very important theme that Wendy Garling brings up in her book is how Mahaprajapati made a robe for the Buddha, and the Buddha refuses the robe 3 times and says, "Give it to the Sangha." And it ends up being given to a seemingly insignificant monk named Ajita, who turns out to be Maitreya himself. So there is this understanding that Mahaprajapati was fundamental in sustaining the entire Dharma and the lineage. And the Buddha, just before Mahaprajapati entered parinirvana. Now that's in the Pali Canon. Once again, we have 2 different stories here, right? The Lotus Sutra is telling us one, and the Pali Canon is telling us another. And once again, in the spirit of the one vehicle, these stories fit together seamlessly. So when Mahaprajapati asked the Buddha's permission, this is the end of her life, and according to one account, she's 120 years old. It's very hard to juggle these events sometimes when you're talking about the historicity of the sutras. Anyway, the Buddha says, "There are still these fools who doubt that women too can grasp the truth. Gautami, show miracles that they might give up false views." And then with the tip of her finger, she covered the sun and the moon. She wore 1,000 suns and moons like a garland. She carried the waters of the 4 oceans in one hand and rained them forth like a great rain cloud at the end of an age. She made a wheel-turning monarch and his retinue appear on the surface of the sky. She showed a Garuda, an elephant, and a roaring lion. And once again, it's mentioned that in the past 100 cycles of lifetime, she aspired to be the Buddha's mother. And when, as this is happening, when one nun is distraught at seeing this great practitioner, this great woman, leave into parinirvana, Gautami comforts her by saying, enough depression, child. Free yourself from Mara's snares. Everything existent changes, and shaking, it's lost in the end. And then she enters nirvana, going through different levels of consciousness, and there is a great funeral. One interesting thing, there's an exchange towards the end between Gautami and the Buddha, when she is still holding on to him as her son. And she said, "I suckled you with a mother's milk." And the Buddha said, "I suckled you with the milk of Dharma." So there's a fair exchange. And then some of her last words are, "If you love me, be like me. Be a great practitioner." And somewhat with anachronism, uphold the Lotus Sutra, although she didn't quite say that, but she might have. And so now let's turn to Yasidara. So once again, there's an interesting exchange between the Buddha and Yasidara. And I said, he speaks volumes of what might have been understood in the gaze of one another. So Yasidara thought she was passed over. And she thought, this time the Buddha, I guess, is reading her thoughts. While giving the predictions, the only name the Bhagavad did not mention was mine. Then the Buddha says, on the contrary, he just launches into her prophecy and of her Buddha name and her Buddha land, and that her lifetime will be great amsamyekas of kalpas, and an incalculable number of times. Various places in the sutra, other arhats or bodhisattvas are given this prediction, and sometimes 20 kalpas, sometimes 1 kalpa. I'm not going to kind of figure out why these numbers are different, but there is a great prophecy to Yasidara. And by the end, both Mahaprajapati and Yasidara say, "Oh, Bhagavat, as a great leader, you bring ease to devas and humans. Having heard our predictions, our minds are at peace and we are content." They say this with a unified voice. So let's look at Yasidara's life. So she lost her husband, right? And she's lonely in a lonely palace. Like you can see, according to one story, how hard she tried to hold on to the Buddha, but it's understood that the Buddha picked out his mother when he was in Tushita heaven through careful scrutiny. She was exemplary, having perfected all of the 6 paramitas, and she was faultless, blameless, and utterly pure being. And so she's a fit vessel to welcome the Buddha, if you will. But once again, she's still a human being, and eventually she recognizes that the great merit and the good karma that she had, but at the time when this is happening, her grief is unspeakable, and she says in the Mahavagga, she's approached by a servant, and the servant says, "Oh, Queen, why are you so sad and emaciated?" And Mahaprajapati, looking at the maid, replied, "Oh, servant, come in. I shall tell you why I am so sorrowful nowadays. I'm sad because the Lord Buddha, the founder of the religion, no longer loves me, even though I have done nothing wrong. I faithfully performed all my wifely duties towards him. I must be a person of little merit." You know, she's not unlike us. She has self-doubt. She doesn't, she's feeling loss, feeling pain, and she's trying to justify it, trying to understand it. She says, "I can accept being abandoned, but the Buddha should have sympathy for his son, Rahula. He is lovable and innocent. His perfection is like that of a lotus standing above the surface of a pond. We have suffered greatly as if crushed by a mountain. My husband departed without saying goodbye. He then returned unannounced and did not come to see me. In the past, my Lord came to my quarters without telling anyone and came into my bedroom, even when the bed was unmade. He was kind to me and never harsh or angry. And now he comes to see his father, but not me." And so she says, "Oh, my servant, I am not an evil person. There must be a consequence of evil. This must be a consequence of evil karma in a past life. I'm like a tree that has lost its flowers and its fruit. I have been abandoned, but not because of anything I've done." And then, of course, there are other stories of her really chewing out Chandaka or Chana, the charioteer. "Why did you take my husband away?" And there are other, there's a lot of information on Yasidara. There's also a point where she was mean to the Buddha in a former life, and she points out to him that all of her actions were for his benefit because she helped him perfect all of the paramitas. So I just thought I would share some of these stories to show the richness that is, it's not simply suggested in the text. These are real people, to the extent that we know that this is happening to. And when we can see them as being human and having doubts, and then having joined the Sangha, sometimes with great difficulty, and they persevered and achieved great attainment, I think it's very inspiring. And as a matter of fact, Vivian Sasson, the woman who wrote, Vanessa Sasson, who wrote the Yasidara and the Buddha, says that what she's writing, this is a novel. She says it's not historical fiction, it's hagiographic fiction. Hagiography is the way of praising saints and sages. It's literature about adulation, putting people on a pedestal who deserve to be on a pedestal. It's a kind of work that can help inspire us. And I think this is really something very, very important. And now let me last turn, I think I have still a little time, to the last exchange, as I'm putting it, between the Buddha, and this is 80 trillion million bodhisattvas. And once again, I don't know how we quite understand this with our ordinary conceptual minds. I mean, they wouldn't fit in the Javid Center, not on several planets. And that actually is, rather than thinking that's kind of unbelievable, it's really a way of seeing how the sutra and the Buddha mind is beyond enumeration, beyond time, beyond space. And that communication can happen in so many ways other than the ways that we're accustomed to. So these bodhisattvas that the Buddha is looking at have reached this stage of non-retrogression. And this is actually understood to be, it's not mentioned in the Lotus Sutra, but in other sutras like the Lankavatara, of reaching the 8th bhumi, where they have Anupitika Dharma Kashanti. This is the patience, which is really a fundamental understanding of this sutra, which is Ren Li, which is mentioned in the sutra in Chinese, the paramita of patience. They have reached this stage where they're not going to backslide and where they're not fooled by appearances of things. They're no longer projecting. They see the emptiness of all dharmas. And so here they are with the Buddha in the assembly, and they say, if the Bhagavan commands us to preserve and teach this sutra, then we will extensively expound this dharma exactly as the Buddha has taught. And then they thought, the Buddha now keeps silent and does not command us. What should we do? Now, I am perhaps blowing this out of proportion, but I don't think I can. I think this silence is rather remarkable. And if you remember the Vimalakirti Sutra in the chapter about non-dualism, where all of the other bodhisattvas give very eloquent explanations and understandings of what non-dualism is, but Vimalakirti remains silent, the only way that it can truly be expressed. So what is the nature of this silence when these great bodhisattvas, these non-backsliding bodhisattvas, are asking what to do? And they also, it says, they also had the intention of wanting to fill their original bodhisattva vow. And the Buddha is silent. So Dao Zhang in his commentary thinks, well, the Buddha is silent because he doesn't want the bodhisattvas to be fearful. But there's perhaps another understanding suggested to me by one of my teachers, that the Buddha is actually imparting the teaching of non-attachment, the final letting go. because what happens is this great assembly of bodhisattvas utters with a lion's roar in the presence of the Buddha. So usually it is the Buddha who gives the lion's roar. But now that these bodhisattvas are doing that, it's really significant to my mind, of this greater attainment, this greater fulfillment of their vow. And they say, "Oh, Bhagavat, after the Tathagata's parinirvana, we will roam throughout the worlds of the 10 directions, enabling sentient beings to copy, preserve, and recite this sutra, and to explain its meaning. Practice it according to the Dharma and remember it correctly. This will all be due to the Buddha's majestic power." So this is a very, very powerful chapter in the sutra. And then the chapter ends, I want to speak about this for just a few minutes, with the bodhisattvas actually explaining the challenges that they're going to face and their indomitable spirit. So they first say to the Buddha, "We beg you not to be concerned." So even now they have the Buddha's well-being in mind. "For after the Buddha's passage into extinction," right? So the teaching, the sutra, the essence of the sutra is not going to go extinct. But they say, "In a frightful and evil age," this is why the sutra sounds very contemporary to me, "we will broadly preach these ignorant men, whoever they may be, that revile us with foul mouths or attack us with knives and staves. We will endure all. The monks of an evil age, men of twisted wisdom, their hearts sycophanted and crooked, say they have attained what they have not attained." This is really fake news. Really also, it's funny, in reading this, I realize that when we hear ourselves talking about foul-mouthed people, ignorant men, we usually think it's someone else. We don't always wonder about ourselves and wonder how people are looking at us and what are we overlooking. But these bodhisattvas don't have to worry about that. They are really saying it like it is. So these they're encountering people who say they've attained what they've not attained, and who say they are treading the true path, and they look down at mankind. And one translator said they're bad-mouthing people. They say they tread the true path, and that they are respected and revered by the whole world as if they were arhats who had mastered the 6 penetrations or divine powers. So they're real posers. And they say these things to all the monks, and what they are is they're greedy for wealth and food, and they speak outer path, non-Buddhist doctrines. They fabricate their own sutras to deceive and confuse worldlings. So, boy, is there a lot of misinformation out there that these bodhisattvas realize they have to deal with. And always in the great assembly, they seek to ruin us before kings, great ministers, Brahmins, and householders, and other monks. They slander us, saying we're evil, calling us men of evil, and say that we're speaking non-Buddhist doctrines, outer path doctrines. And because we venerate the Buddha, we endure all of these evils. We're belittled as, "You're all Buddhas, right?" And now here's a very interesting footnote to this, because in the Hurwitz translation, which is translated from the Chinese, he also read the Sanskrit version, which differs in many cases. And in that particular passage, the Sanskrit says, "And whoever ill-disposed shall despise us at that time, they shall all be Buddhas, and we will by all means endure it." So this seems very much in character. The bodhisattvas are recognizing that the people who give us hard times are Buddhas. How Gilbert is always saying, the Buddhas use our vexations to practice. Well, here's a perfect example. So, such disparaging words we endure patiently. In this turbid kalpa and evil age, so many frightful demons enter their bodies. And we talk about lizard people sometimes. To curse and bring shame to us. We respect the Buddha. We should don insult-tolerating armor. There's a good suggestion. We care little for body and life. We only cherish the supreme path. Master Sheng Yen said that this line that I just read, Wadong Yu Laisher, Hujer Fo Swa, Wobu Ai Shen Ming, Dan Shi Wu Shang Dao. That was the most important line in this entire chapter. We care little for body and life, only cherish the supreme path. Right. In ages to come, we who will uphold and protect the Buddha's instructions. The world-honored one should know the evil monks of a turbid age will not know the Buddha's expedient means, speaking appropriate Dharma. They'll give us evil mutterings and nasty looks, continually witness our expulsion from far from stupas and temples. Such multitude of evils, mindful of the Buddha's order, we will endure such trials. Whoever seeks the Dharma, whether in city or town, we will go there and speak the Dharma that he has enjoined. We are the world-honored one's emissaries, dwelling among the multitudes. Without fear, we shall speak the Dharma well, wishing the Buddha tranquility in the presence of the world-honored one and Buddhas from the 10 directions. We utter this solemn oath. The Buddha himself knows what's in our hearts. So there the Bodhisattvas conclude. And, you know, I don't think they're complaining. I think they're telling it like it is. They're actually, the sutra is expressed so that we all can see it. And they're letting us know, and this happens many times in the sutra, about the difficulties that one might encounter in one's practice and in pursuing the highest, Anuttara Samyak Bodhi. This is, but well worth our efforts. So I ran a little bit over, but hope everyone's still with me. And what I'd like to do is to just say the closing of lines of transferring merit, and then perhaps if we have time, some questions. So may the virtuous merits adorn and glorify the pure land of the Buddhas. Upwardly, we repay the 4 layers of gratitude. Downwardly, we alleviate the sufferings of the 3 destinies. May those who see and hear the Dharma generate Bodhi mind, exhausting the body of retribution. May we be born in the land of supreme bliss. So, thank you all. That is a whirlwind tour of chapter 13.
Thank you, Harry. The Lotus Sutra is one of my favorite sutras as well. Let's see if anyone has any questions. Michelle. Michelle, you can speak directly.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. That was wonderful. And where can I just start listening? So where can we listen to your previous chapters recorded?
Oh, that's very nice. They're recorded on the Chan Center's website, right from, I believe they're still there, from chapter 1. And
great.
I'm going, it is my intention, my vow, to go through all 28 chapters. So I'm almost halfway through. And it's really been a wonderful excursion. It's a wonderful journey because I keep learning more. I keep seeing more into the sutra and looking at the chapters that I've spoken about in different ways. So I like to bring it all up so that we can learn about this together. Oh, yes, Masood. Please.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Masood, can you unmute and speak, ask your question directly?
Yes, thank you so much for your great lecture. My question is, does the Buddha prophesize that all the living beings will get enlightened eventually in the Lotus Sutra? All the sentient beings will get enlightened eventually?
Yes, yes, that is said a number of times. As a matter of fact, if you remember when I was talking about Mahaprajapati, the Buddha reminds her that she doesn't have to ask for her prophecy, although I'm sure she's eager. He said he's made a general statement that he says Shravakas, right? So those are people, let's say, on the path. But I think the implication is that all sentient beings eventually will reach Buddhahood.
My problem is that we have been in samsara from beginningless time, there's infinite time. So if we are going to get enlightened, so it means that why we didn't get enlightened in this infinite without beginning samsara, that we have been in samsara without beginning for infinite time. So why we didn't get enlightened in this infinite amount of time, and how we are getting enlightened in the future if we didn't get enlightened?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think the answer lies in our own awareness. So right now, all of us, I'm assuming, who are listening are practitioners on some level, people who are seeking the truth in some ways. So Masood, even the fact that you're asking this question, the way that you're asking it, is a sign of your attainment, the seed of Buddhahood within you. Now, I admit I would love to be able to snap my fingers, or have the Buddha snap his fingers and turn this into a pure land. There is some indication that if you read the Vimalakirti Sutra and talk about, Sherfu was always talking about making this a pure land on earth. But we have to be honest about how we feel. I think this honesty is also a very important quality that we have. I mean, anyone who thinks that everyone is enlightened and the world is perfect for everyone is living in a dream. But we're all living in a dream in one way or another. And as practitioners, we have the possibility, and if you look at the Lotus Sutra, the certainty of waking up. Yes, sooner rather than later. I can't give predictions. Manjushri was the one who gave the prediction for Maitreya, not the Buddha in chapter 1. This is something, Masood, this is definitely worth contemplation. I can't imagine that I gave you a very satisfactory answer, but it's something to look very deeply into.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Harry, I'm terribly late, but I heard the last maybe 15 minutes or so of your talk, and
Okay.
you're very passionate about this sutra. How do you really? I love reading it too, because it's written very beautifully. How do you deepen your understanding of this sutra? Do you just read it, penetrate it, contemplate it, or do you use other materials as well? And if there are, what are they?
That's also very good question. Where I am right now, to be perfectly honest, I feel that my role is a Dharma teacher, and I have to, I do read the sutra. I've read it fully, deeply 3 times, at least now. And actually, multiple times, more than that. I'm sure I read chapter 13 at least 10 times in at least 5 or 6 different translations, and entirely in the Chinese. So it starts to sink in. But I feel that the supplemental information, seeing what other scholars and what great Chan masters, Zen masters say about it, are very helpful. And I've actually grown much more certain and devoted to the sutra, because I have one of my teachers is not the greatest fan of the Lotus Sutra, because he says that there's no specific teaching telling you how to get to Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, whereas other sutras really lay it out, in great detail. And I think you have to understand that the Lotus Sutra is being promulgated from the point of view who's someone who's reached that point. So everything in the sutra has some essence about it, which you can only see with repeated reading and contemplation. Remember, Hakuin, the great Japanese master, read this sutra when he was 18 years old and said, "This is ridiculous. This is a sutra? Are you give me a break?" And then at 36, he had a great revelation, and he understood why this is considered the greatest sutra by many. In Jur-E, the great Tiandai master, in his Panjiao, the classification of the sutras, the Lotus Sutra is the highest. Sometimes the Nirvana Sutra is in there, but this sutra is considered the highest teaching. And it has a very deep message of faith, right? Which, once again, you can't just read about faith, even though it may say have faith. That is something one acquires through contemplation and practice, and helping other people, and getting help by other people, seeing our connections to the world. There's no place where the Lotus Sutra isn't, as far as I'm concerned. But we get caught up in the details and the narrative and the parables of it, which are actually good things to get caught up in, because they point us in so many different directions. So it's really an ongoing process of continual discovery and rediscovery. That's what I find.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Harry, so much for your great teaching today. We truly appreciate it.
I'm so glad that I was able to share it with everyone. And this is really just, I feel very privileged to be able to do this. And I wish all of you get Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. And I guess next time, November 7th, hopefully we'll meet again, and we can continue our journey together.